Hey guys, tonight we are going to step away from the polished marble of palaces and the echoing silence of cathedrals to visit the one place in the Middle Ages where life actually happened, the tavern. Imagine the smell of roasting pork fat mingling with wood smoke, the roar of a dozen conversations happening at once, and the clinking of rough pottery mugs. It sounds cozy, doesn't it? Though knowing the hygiene standards of the 14th century, you probably won't survive the night without contracting something unpleasant from a shared cup, or perhaps losing your coin purse to a cut purse who's surprisingly good with a dagger. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing in the middle of a street, or, to be more accurate, you are sinking into one. It is late October in the year 1350, somewhere in a bustling English market town, maybe York, maybe just outside London. The sun has already dipped below the jagged silhouette of the timber-framed houses, leaving the sky a bruised purple that is rapidly fading to black. The air is cold, a damp, bone-chilling mist that seems to seep right through your woolen tunic, clinging to your skin like a wet sheet. But the cold isn't your immediate problem. Your immediate problem is the ground. You lift your right foot, and the earth makes a wet, sucking sound. Shh! Thwack! As it reluctantly releases your boot. In the modern world, we complain about potholes, but here, the concept of a road is more of a suggestion than an infrastructure project. The street is a thick, churned-up soup of mud, clay, and rainwater. And, if we're being entirely honest about the aromatic profile wafting up to your nose, a fair amount of animal waste. Pigs, which are surprisingly autonomous citizens in this town, have been rooting around here all day, and their contribution to the pavement is substantial. You trudge forward, keeping your head down. You have to be careful where you step. There is a narrow ridge of slightly drier earth near the walls of the houses, a sort of primitive sidewalk, but it's slippery. You don't want to fall. Falling here isn't just embarrassing, it's a biological hazard. If you go down in this muck, you aren't just getting dirty. You're becoming a petri dish for every ailment known to medieval science. As you navigate this obstacle course, you pull your cloak tighter. The town is winding down, but it's not silent. You can hear the wooden shutters of shop fronts slamming closed. Bang, 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 down the length of the alley. The blacksmith's hammer has finally stopped its rhythmic clanging, replaced by the distant, mournful tolling of a church bell. It's a warning, the night is coming, and in the Middle Ages, the night is not your friend. There are no streetlights here, no ambient glow from storefronts. When it gets dark, it gets pitch black, the kind of heavy darkness that feels like a physical weight. You need to be indoors before that happens. You need warmth, you need calories, and perhaps most importantly, you need a drink that hasn't been contaminated by the very gutter you're walking through. You aren't looking for an inn. That's a common misconception for us time travelers. Inns are big, expensive establishments designed for wealthy merchants or official couriers. They have stables, private rooms, and fresh sheets. You can't afford that, nor are you looking for an alehouse, which is often just a neighbor's kitchen where a woman named Agnes sells her extra homebrew until it runs out. Those are cozy, but you want something with a bit more permanence, a bit more professional chaos. You are looking for a tavern. Historians still argue whether the distinction between inns, taverns, and alehouses was actually as rigid in practice as it was in the law books. Some scholars suggest the terms were used interchangeably by thirsty peasants, while others insist the licensing laws created strict boundaries. But for you, right now, the legal definition matters less than the promise of a fire. You scan the street, squinting through the gloom. How do you find a business in a world without neon signs or Google Maps? You look up. Jutting out from the second story of a particularly lopsided building up ahead, you see it. It's a long wooden pole extending horizontally over the street, looking like a giant fishing rod aimed at the pedestrians below. This is the ale stake. It is the universal symbol of "we have booze here." It's elegant in its simplicity. If the pole is out, the tavern is open. If the pole is gone, keep walking. This particular ale stake is remarkably long. It stretches nearly 7 feet out from the wall. You might chuckle at the overcompensation, but this was actually a serious public safety issue. In fact, here is a quirky little reality of the time. In 1375, the authorities in London actually had to pass an ordinance limiting the length of these ale stakes to 7 feet. Why? Because tavern owners kept making them longer and longer to outdo their competitors until they became a hazard for men riding on horseback. There are court records of knights and messengers galloping down narrow streets only to be clotheslined by an aggressively long sign advertising cheap beer. It brings a whole new meaning to a header. Thankfully, you are on foot, so you are safe from being decapitated by marketing. As you get closer, you see something hanging from the end of the pole. It's a large, bushy bundle of foliage. It looks like an oversized wreath, or perhaps a small tree that's having a very bad day. This is the bush. Traditionally, a bush, often ivy or evergreen, signaled that wine was sold here, a nod to Bacchus, the Roman god of wine who was rarely seen without his ivy crown. But in many English towns, the bush has just become the general logo for drink. It swirls in the cold wind, shedding a few dried leaves into the mud below. It's not exactly a sleek corporate logo, but it works. It triggers a Pavlovian response in your brain. That bush means there is a hearth on the other side of that timber wall. You pick up the pace, your heavy leather boots splashing through a puddle that looks suspiciously deep. The smell of the street, that cloying mix of rot and wet wool, begins to change. As you close the distance to the door, a new scent cuts through the cold air. It's the smell of wood smoke, thick and resinous. Then, underneath that, the savory, heavy aroma of roasting meat and onions. It smells like salvation. You reach the door. It's a heavy thing, made of oak planks bound with iron, looking sturdy enough to withstand a siege, which, given the rowdiness of a Friday night crowd, it might have to. There is no glass window to peek through, just the solid wood and the muffled roar of voices seeping through the cracks. It sounds like a dull roar, a collective hum of humanity packed into a small space. You hesitate for just a second, your hand hovering over the iron latch. The street behind you is now almost entirely swallowed by shadow. The wind picks up, biting at your ears. The choice is made. You grip the cold iron ring, press your thumb down on the latch, and push. The door groans, a long, protesting creak that announces your arrival to anyone paying attention, and you step out of the 14th century gloom and into the firelight. You pause for a fleeting second in the doorway, one boot inside the warmth, the other still anchored in the cold mud of the street. It's that brief moment of transition where you are physically straddling two worlds, and it gives you a chance to actually look, really look, at the structure you are about to trust with your life for the next few hours. In the flickering light of the torch sputtering near the entrance, the building looks less like a feat of engineering and more like a happy accident. The first thing you notice as you grip the door frame is the texture of the wall itself. It isn't stone, and it certainly isn't brick. This is the quintessential wattle and daub. If you were to peel back the whitewash, which is flaking off in large scab-like patches, you would find a woven lattice of wooden strips, the wattle, plastered over with a sticky, fibrous mixture, the daub. Now, here is a quirky little construction fact that might make you wash your hands twice later. That daub isn't just mud. To get the consistency right, medieval builders used a specific recipe that usually included clay, sand, straw, and a generous amount of animal dung. Cow manure was the standard binder. It's incredibly effective insulation, keeping the tavern warm in winter and cool in summer, but it does mean that, technically speaking, you are entering a house built of poop. It dries odorless, mostly, but when the autumn rains soak into the walls, there is a faint, earthy musk that reminds you that this building is organic. Your eyes travel up the timber frame. These massive black oak beams are the skeleton of the house, and they are visibly warped. Everything leans. The door frame is a parallelogram rather than a rectangle, and the whole second floor seems to be bulging out over the street, looming over you like a heavy brow. This architectural overhang is called jettying. If you look up and down the street, you'll see almost every house doing this. The ground floor is narrow, the second floor sticks out a couple of feet, and the third floor sticks out even further. In some narrow alleyways, the third floors of opposing houses are so close that neighbors can shake hands or empty chamber pots on each other across the street. Why build like this? It's a question that brings up one of those persistent historical myths. You might have heard that people built this way to avoid taxes based on the square footage of the ground floor. It's a clever idea, but it's mostly fiction. Historians still argue whether tax avoidance played any minor role in specific eccentric townships, but the consensus is that jettying was simply structural pragmatism. It maximizes floor space on the upper levels without obstructing the narrow street below, and more importantly, it protects the wattle and daub of the lower walls from the rain. By sticking the upper floor out, the builders created a permanent umbrella for the foundation. But there is another reason the tavern looks so wonky. The oak used to build this frame was likely worked green, that is, unseasoned. Medieval carpenters didn't wait years for their massive timber beams to dry out in a kiln. They felled the tree, squared it up, and locked it into place with wooden pegs while the sap was still wet. As the wood dried over the following decades, it twisted, bowed, and settled into the quirky, uneven shapes you see now. The house is literally frozen in the middle of a slow-motion writhe. Above your head, creaking on its iron hinges, is the signage we spotted earlier. Now that you are closer, you can see the detail. The evergreen bush, the ale stake, is actually tied to a physical, painted board. This is important. While the bush tells you what this place is, a place to drink, The painted sign tells you who they are. In a society where literacy is a specialized skill reserved for clergy and clerks, written names are useless. You wouldn't call this place the Red Lion and write the words Red Lion on a board. You would paint a giant, angry red lion. It's a visual language. This particular tavern sign depicts a white swan with a golden chain around its neck. It's a common motif. Tavern names in the Middle Ages weren't just random nouns pulled from a hat. They were often political statements or feudal loyalties. The white swan is the badge of the de Bohun family, or perhaps a nod to the king's ancestors. By drinking here, you are subtly acknowledging the local lord's influence. Other signs you might have passed on the way here tell different stories. A crosskeys usually signifies a tavern on church land dedicated to St. Peter. A Saracen's Head might reference the Crusades, a bit of lingering wartime propaganda turned into a pub name. However, there is a fascinating debate about the religious origins of some of these names. You might have heard the theory that a tavern named the Goat Encompasses is actually a corrupted, slurred pronunciation of the Puritan phrase, God encompasseth us. It's a delightful linguistic story that tour guides love to tell. Unfortunately, it's almost certainly nonsense. Most linguistic historians point out that the medieval mind was perfectly capable of naming a pub after a goat and a compass without it being a secret religious code. Sometimes a goat is just a goat. As you stand there, admiring the faded paint on the swan, a gust of wind rattles the sign against its bracket. Clack, clack, clack. It's a lonely sound. You look at the roofline above the sign. It's thatched, of course, thick bundles of reed or straw packed tightly together. It's a brilliant insulator, but it's also a terrified city council's nightmare. In a city built of wood and tar, topped with dried straw, fire is the apocalypse. That is why, if you look closely at the neighbors' roofs, you might see some of them transitioning to clay tiles. Since the early 1200s, cities like London have been trying to ban thatch to stop the entire metropolis from burning down every other Tuesday. But tiles are expensive. The owner of this tavern clearly hasn't upgraded yet. He's gambling on luck, hoping that stray sparks from the chimney don't catch the dry reeds. It's a sobering thought. You are about to enter a wooden box, packed with straw, lit by open fire, filled with drunk people. The safety standards here are non-existent, but the cold wind bites at the back of your neck again, sliding down your collar, and the risk of fire suddenly seems less pressing than the certainty of freezing. The timber frame around the door is worn smooth at shoulder height, polished by the thousands of wool tunics that have brushed against it over the years. The wood is dark, almost black, stained by decades of soot and smoke escaping the interior. You place your hand on that smooth, cold oak. You can feel the grain, the history of the tree that stood in a forest before the Black Death, before the 100 Years' War. It's time. You duck your head because the door frame is built for people with worse nutrition and shorter spines than you, and you commit. You step over the high wooden threshold, designed to keep the dirty floor rushes in and the drafts out, and finally leave the street behind. You step over the threshold, the heavy oak door thudding shut behind you, cutting off the wind with a finality that feels like a seal breaking. The first thing that happens isn't that you see the room, it's that the room assaults you. You have just walked into a solid, invisible wall of sensory information so dense It almost has physical mass. If the outside world was cold, wet, and empty, this world is hot, loud, and incredibly full. The temperature difference alone is enough to make your head spin. You've gone from a damp, near-freezing chill to a stifling, tropical heat in the span of a single step. The blood rushes back to your frozen ears and nose, creating a prickly, stinging sensation that makes you wince. But the heat is the least of your worries. It's the air itself that stops you in your tracks. The atmosphere in here is thick. You take a breath, and you aren't just inhaling oxygen, you are inhaling a meal. The smell is a complex, layered symphony of the Middle Ages. The base note is wood smoke, acrid and heavy. On top of that, there is the sharp, yeasty tang of spilled ale that has soaked into the floorboards and fermented. Then comes the savory punch of roasting pork fat and onions, which makes your empty stomach cramp with sudden hunger. And finally, weaving through it all, is the undeniable musky scent of unwashed humanity, wool dampened by rain, old leather, and 50 people who think bathing is a suspicious medical procedure best avoided in winter. Your eyes are watering. You blink rapidly, trying to clear the tears, but it's no use. You are experiencing the universal reality of medieval indoor life. Smoke blindness. You might be looking for a fireplace against the wall, a nice stone hearth with a mantelpiece where a tavern keeper might display a pewter mug or two. You won't find one. In the mid-14th century, wall fireplaces with proper chimneys are high-tech luxuries reserved for castles and the stone mansions of the ultra-wealthy. For a timber-framed tavern like this, the heating system is ancient and primal. In the center of the room, directly on the earthen floor, or perhaps on a raised stone square if the landlord is fancy, lies the open hearth. It is a bonfire, essentially, burning right in the middle of the restaurant. There is no chimney stack to funnel the smoke away. Instead, the smoke rises in a lazy, gray column, drifts up to the rafters, and hopefully, if physics is cooperating, finds its way out through a hole in the roof called a louver. The louver is basically a spun wooden lantern with slats designed to let smoke out while keeping rain in. It works, mostly, but on a windy night like this, the draft often pushes the smoke back down, trapping it inside. The result is a permanent gray smog that hangs in the upper 3 feet of the room. If you stand up straight, you are breathing soot. If you sit down on the low benches, you are in the clear zone. This architecture dictates the posture of the entire room. Everyone is hunched, keeping their heads low, literally ducking beneath the weather inside the house. Historians still argue whether the transition from these central open hearths to wall fireplaces was driven purely by the desire for smoke-free air, or if it was a status symbol that trickled down. Some evidence suggests that for centuries, commoners actually preferred the central fire because it radiated heat in a 360-degree circle, allowing more people to huddle around it. A wall fireplace is elegant, but it only heats one side of the room. In a drafty wooden box, efficiency trumps comfort. As your eyes finally adjust to the stinging gloom, the scene resolves itself out of the gray haze. The lighting is incredibly dim. There are no bright lanterns. The primary light source is that central fire, which casts long, dancing shadows that stretch and warp against the walls. The corners of the room are swallowed by total darkness. Scattered on a few tables, you might see rush lights. These are the medieval equivalent of a glow stick and about as effective. They are made by taking the pith of a rush plant, dipping it in mutton fat, and lighting one end. They don't burn with a steady flame. They sputter and hiss, dripping hot grease, giving off a light that is barely strong enough to read by. Not that anyone here is reading. The gloom serves a purpose, though. It hides the grime. In this flickering amber light, the tavern looks almost romantic. The soot-stained beams vanish into the shadows above. The dirt on the faces of the patrons is smoothed out. It's a soft focus lens applied to a harsh reality. You unfasten your wet cloak, the wool heavy and smelling of wet dog, and look for a place to stow it. There is no coat check. There are no hooks. You keep your property on your body, or you lose it. You drape the damp fabric over your arm, feeling the weight of it, and step further into the room. The floor beneath your boots feels different here. It's softer, spongy. We'll get a closer look at what exactly you're walking on later, but for now, you just register the uneven give of the ground. The noise level is the next thing to hit you. From the outside, it was a dull roar. Inside, it's a cacophony. There is no background music, no looped playlist. The soundtrack is entirely human. A group of men in the corner are arguing about the price of wool, slamming their fists on the table for emphasis. A dog is barking at something unseen in the shadows. Somewhere, a woman is laughing, a loud, raucous sound that cuts through the din. It's chaotic, but it's also strangely comforting. After the isolation of the dark street, this noise tells you that you are part of the pack again. You make your way toward the fire, navigating between the trestle tables. You have to be careful. The furniture here is sturdy but haphazard. Benches stick out into the aisles. A stool is overturned. The patrons themselves are obstacles. Legs are stretched out into the walkways, heavy boots acting as tripwires. You step over a sprawling pair of legs belonging to a man who seems to be asleep, his chin resting on his chest, a half-empty mug precariously balanced on his knee. As you get closer to the fire, the heat becomes intense. You can feel your skin tightening, the moisture in your clothes beginning to steam. You reach out your hands toward the flames, rubbing them together. You aren't the only one. This is the prime real estate. A circle of people stands around the hearth, backs to the fire or hands extended, soaking up the warmth. They shift and rotate like planets orbiting a sun, silently negotiating for the best position. There is a quirky, slightly horrifying medical belief prevalent at this time regarding this smoky atmosphere. Many people believe that wood smoke is actually a disinfectant. During times of plague or sickness, fumigating a house with heavy smoke is considered a health measure. So, while your modern lungs are screaming for fresh air, the locals here likely view this thick, choking smog as a protective shield against the miasmas of the night. You are not just getting warm, you are getting cured, much like a side of bacon hanging in the rafters above your head. And speaking of the rafters, if you tilt your head back and squint through the haze, you can see them. Beams of black oak crusted with decades of soot. Hanging from them are hooks holding all manner of things. Dried herbs, cured sausages, perhaps a few tools. It creates a feeling of being in a cave, a cluttered, cozy, subterranean den carved out of wood and shadow. You take a deep breath, trying to filter the smoke through your nose, and turn away from the fire. You've thawed out, your blood is moving again. Now you need to navigate the social hierarchy of the room. You need a drink, and to get one, you have to face the person who actually runs this chaotic kingdom. It's not a landlord. In this establishment, as in many English alehouses, the power rests entirely with the alewife. You turn your back to the fire, your backside now pleasantly roasting, while your front faces the room, and you scan the crowd for the person in charge. It doesn't take long to spot her. In a modern bar, the bartender is often trapped behind a high wooden counter, a barrier that separates the service from the served. Here, there is no such barrier. The service comes to you, or rather, you timidly approach the throne. She is standing near the back wall, guarding two massive wooden barrels that are propped up on a sturdy bench. She is the alewife. And in the 14th century, brewing is almost exclusively a female profession. This isn't a barmaid serving drinks for a male owner. She is the owner, the brewer, the manager, and the bouncer all rolled into one. In the legal records of the time, she would be called a brewster, the feminine suffix "ster" indicating her gender, just as spinster referred to a female spinner. She is a formidable figure. She wears a white linen coif covering her hair, though a few stray strands have escaped in the heat of the evening. Her dress is wool, dyed a practical, murky russet color that hides stains well, and her apron is a map of the day's labor, splashed with yeast, soot, and grease. Her sleeves are rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms that look strong enough to strangle a bear or, more likely, hoist a 10-gallon cauldron of boiling wort without flinching. You approach her cautiously. The modern concept of the customer is always right, has not been invented yet. In fact, right now, the customer is barely tolerated. You are essentially a guest in her extended living room, and she looks at you with a practiced appraisal. She is checking your boots, can you pay? Your belt, are you armed? And your eyes, are you already too drunk? This woman is a pillar of the medieval economy. In many English villages, selling ale is the single most common way for households to make extra money. It is a by industry, something done alongside farming or weaving. But for a successful alewife like this, it's a full-time empire. She likely brewed this batch yesterday, rising at 3 o'clock a.m. to mash the grain while the rest of the town was sleeping. As you wait for her attention, notice the cat weaving between her ankles. It's a large, scarred tabby that looks like it has won more fights than most of the knights in the king's army. This isn't a pet, it's an employee. Grain attracts rats. Rats ruin grain. The cat kills rats. It is a simple, brutal contract. Now, here is a quirky, slightly spooky, historical tidbit for you to chew on. Take a look at the alewife's ensemble. The large cauldron she uses for brewing? Check. The cat prowling around the grain store? Check. The owl stake or broomstick she hangs outside to signal business? Check. And in some regions, a tall, pointed hat worn to stand out in a crowded market? Check. Some cultural historians suggest that our modern Halloween store caricature of the Wicked Witch, the old crone with the cat, cauldron, broom, and pointy hat, is actually a twisted propaganda campaign against these female brewers. As the brewing industry began to professionalize and become more profitable in later centuries, men wanted in. To push women out of the market, the imagery of the alewife was slowly demonized. The wise woman brewing healing potions and comforting ales became the dangerous witch brewing poison. So, when you look at her, You aren't just seeing a bartender, you are seeing the origin story of a cultural icon. Historians still argue whether this connection between alewives and witch iconography is a direct cause and effect or just a convenient coincidence of shared symbols. Some scholars insist the witch's hat has different origins entirely, relating to anti-Semitic caricatures or fashion trends, but the overlap of the cauldron, cat, and broom is undeniably suspicious. She finally acknowledges you with a nod that is more of a chin lift than a greeting. Ale? She asks. It's not a question of what you want, that's obvious, but whether you want the good stuff or the dregs. You nod. She grabs a jug. It's made of coarse earthenware, grayish-brown and unglazed, feeling rough like sandpaper against your palm. She turns to the barrel. There is no tap handle to pull. Instead, she uses a wooden spigot, hammering it open with the heel of her hand. The liquid gushes out, thick, golden brown, and opaque. This is not the filtered, carbonated lager you might be used to. This is real ale in its most primal form. It is literally liquid bread. It's full of suspended yeast, grain particles, and protein. It's murky. If you let it sit for 10 minutes, it will separate into layers like a geological sediment sample. But you don't let it sit. You drink it for the calories as much as the alcohol. She hands you the jug. You fumble for a coin. The currency here is silver pennies. A gallon of good ale might cost you a penny or a penny farthing. Since you aren't buying a gallon yet, you might pay in a farthing, a quarter of a penny. If you don't have a farthing coin, you literally take a silver penny and cut it into 4 pieces with a chisel. She accepts the sliver of silver, bites it. Yes, people actually did that to test the metal's softness and ensure it wasn't lead, and drops it into a pouch at her belt. Before you walk away, you notice a strange chalk mark on the side of the barrel she just poured from. It's a crude symbol. This is the mark of the ale conner. The ale conner is one of the most delightful bureaucratic jobs in history. He is a local official elected to ensure the quality of bread and ale sold in the town. He goes from tavern to tavern, testing the brew to make sure the alewives aren't cheating the customers by watering it down or using moldy grain. There is a legendary story, which falls firmly into the probably a myth but too good not to tell category, about how the ale conner tested the sugar content. The story goes that the official would pour a puddle of ale on a wooden bench, sit in it wearing leather breeches, and wait for 30 minutes. If, when he tried to stand up, his breeches stuck to the bench, the ale was considered of good quality, high sugar/alcohol. If he didn't stick, it was too watery. Imagine explaining that job description on a resume. Professional bench sitter, 1345-1350. Whether or not the pants test is real, the regulation is very real. If this formidable woman sells you bad ale, she can be fined or even subjected to the tumbrel, a ducking stool used to publicly humiliate dishonest brewers. So, despite her gruff demeanor, she has a strong incentive not to poison you. She watches you take your first sip. It's room temperature, of course. The concept of an ice-cold beer is hundreds of years away. It tastes smoky, sweet from the malt, and slightly sour. There are no hops in it yet. Hops won't become standard in English brewing for another century or so. Instead, it's flavored with groot, a mixture of herbs like bog myrtle, yarrow, and mugwort. It's an acquired taste, earthy and floral, like drinking a meadow that has been slightly burnt. Good? She asks. It's a command, not an inquiry. Very good, you lie, or perhaps you mean it. The warmth of the alcohol hits your stomach almost instantly, a pleasant fire to counteract the damp chill of your cloak. She turns back to another customer, a man who is loudly demanding a refill, and her demeanor shifts from indifferent merchant to terrifying matriarch in a split second. She silences him with a sharp word and a gesture that suggests he is one request away from being thrown into the street. You realize quickly that in this tavern, she is the law. The king may rule England, but the alewife rules the keg. You clutch your rough pottery mug with both hands, using it as a hand warmer, and back away respectfully. You have your fuel. Now you need to find a place to park yourself. You turn back to the crowded room, scanning the floor for a safe path, which brings us to the rather delicate matter of what exactly you are walking on. Clutching your warm, rough mug of ale, you navigate away from the alewife's domain, looking for a place to stand where you won't be trampled. You find a relatively safe harbor near one of the massive oak pillars that supports the ceiling, and as you shift your weight, you become acutely aware of the ground beneath your feet. It doesn't sound like stone, which would click, or wood, which would thud. It crunches. A soft, fibrous, rustling crunch, like you are walking through a pile of autumn leaves in a forest. You look down. You are standing on a carpet, but not a woven textile from Persia or a wool rug. You are standing on rushes. This is the universal flooring solution of medieval Europe. The floor itself is likely just tamped down earth, hard-packed clay that turns to slimy mud if it gets wet. To keep things relatively dry and insulated, the tavern keeper has strewn the floor with dried plants. Ideally, these are actual rushes or sedges harvested from the riverbanks. If they are feeling fancy, or perhaps expecting a visit from the bishop, they might mix in sweet flag, Acorus calamus, or meadowsweet. Here is the genius of the system. When you step on sweet flag, the friction crushes the fibers and releases a scent that is surprisingly pleasant, something like a mix of tangerine and cinnamon. It acts as a primitive, foot-activated air freshener. Every time a patron shuffles to the bar, they release a little burst of perfume to combat the overwhelming smell of unwashed bodies and roasting meat. It's a brilliant, low-tech solution to an olfactory problem. However, the reality of the tavern floor is rarely that idyllic. While the top layer of rushes might look fresh and green, perhaps scattered just this morning, it is what lies beneath that should concern you. The medieval approach to cleaning a floor like this is not remove and replace, it is cover and forget. When the top layer gets dirty, flattened, or soaked with spilled ale, the standard practice is often just to sprinkle a fresh layer of clean rushes over the mess. This creates what archaeologists and horrified time travelers might call a stratigraphy of filth. It is a geological lasagna of human debris. If you were to take a shovel and dig down through the 3 or 4 inches of plant matter under your boots, you would find a perfectly preserved history of the tavern's last 6 months. You would find gnawed chicken bones that were tossed over a shoulder. You would find nutshells, crusts of bread, and an impressive amount of dog hair. You would find grease that dripped from the roasting spit. And, given the relaxed attitude toward spitting in this era, you would find plenty of dried saliva. The Dutch humanist Erasmus, who visited in England a bit later than our current date, wrote a letter about these rush floors that has become famous for its sheer visceral disgust. He complained that the floors were marvels of filth, hiding a collection of, and I am quoting the translation here, spittle, vomit, leakage of dogs and men, spilled beer, leftovers of fish, and other abominations not to be mentioned. He was convinced that these festering damp carpets were the source of all the fevers and plagues that seemed to constantly sweep through London. Historians still argue whether Erasmus was providing an accurate journalistic account of the average English floor, or if he was simply a fastidious, clean freak with a grudge against English housekeeping. Some scholars point out that Erasmus was a man who brought his own personal spices to dinner parties. He was high maintenance. Court records show that many establishments were fined if they didn't fully change their rushes regularly. But looking at the dark, matted patches near the tables in this tavern, you get the feeling that Erasmus might have had a point. This floor ecosystem creates a specific set of rules for you as a guest. First and foremost, the 5-second rule does not apply here. It doesn't even apply for 5 milliseconds. If you drop a piece of bread, it is gone. It belongs to the rushes now. Do not pick it up. Do not blow on it. Just accept the loss and move on. If you try to salvage it, you are essentially breading your food in a mixture of antique dust and flea eggs. And speaking of fleas, you might notice a slight itching sensation around your ankles. The rush floor is a paradise for insect life. It is warm, protected, and full of food scraps. It is the medieval equivalent of a bustling metropolis for beetles, fleas, and lice. This is why medieval people often tucked their trousers into their boots or wore hose tied tightly at the knee. It wasn't just fashion, it was a blockade. Occasionally, you might see a patron stomp their foot aggressively or kick at a particularly dense pile of straw. They aren't dancing, they are disrupting a mouse. The tavern cat we saw earlier is good, but she is only one soldier in an endless war. The floor is alive, quite literally, with a scurrying, crawling underclass of creatures that are enjoying the tavern just as much as you are. Yet, despite the grim hygiene profile, there is something weirdly cozy about it. The rushes soften the acoustics of the room, absorbing the sharp clatter of pottery and the harsh edges of shouting voices. They provide a soft, yielding surface that is much easier on the joints than cold stone. When the firelight hits the golden brown stems, it gives the room a warm, rustic glow that feels undeniably homey. There is also a fascinating safety hazard buried in this greenery. We mentioned the fire earlier, that open hearth blazing in the center of the room. Now, combine a roaring bonfire with a floor covered in dried, flammable straw. It seems like a recipe for immediate disaster, doesn't it? It is. To combat this, the curfew bell from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire, would ring at night, signaling that all fires must be damped down. But in a tavern, the fire stays lit. So, you have a room full of drunk people stumbling around on kindling next to an open flame. It is a miracle that the entire Middle Ages didn't just burn to the ground in a single weekend. You shift your stance, and your boot crushes a hidden pockets of old walnut shells. Crack, crunch. It's a satisfying sound. You take another sip of your ale, trying not to think too hard about the leakage of dogs that Erasmus warned you about. You decide to keep your gaze at eye level from now on. But looking up brings a new challenge. You have your drink, you have your standing spot on the compost carpet, but you still haven't ordered food. and the smell of the perpetual stew bubbling over the fire is becoming impossible to ignore. It is thick, savory, and suspiciously consistent. You realize that to survive the night, you need more than just liquid calories. You need to brave the menu. But first, you need to navigate the complex social ritual of ordering your poison, and I don't just mean the alcohol. You have survived the initial ale purchase, but as you look around at the other patrons, you notice a distinct lack of uniformity in their cups. Not everyone is drinking the murky, unhopped ale you're nursing. The man to your left, the one with the velvet trim on his hood that suggests he's a merchant having a particularly good quarter, is sipping something clearer, reddish, and served in a slightly nicer vessel. This brings us to the great beverage divide of the medieval world: ale versus wine. And choosing between them isn't just about taste. It's a statement about your wallet, your geography, and your willingness to gamble with your digestive system. The ale you have is the people's drink. It's brewed locally, literally 10 feet away by the formidable woman we just met. It's cheap, nutritious, and because the water was boiled during the brewing process, it's generally safer than the water from the well out back, which is probably suspiciously close to the cesspit. But it has a shelf life of about 5 days before it starts to turn sour. It's a drink-it-now commodity. The wine, on the other hand, is an import. It has traveled. Most of the wine consumed in England at this time comes from Gascony in France. It arrives in massive wooden tons, shipped up the Thames or overland by cart. By the time it reaches a tavern like this, it has been sloshed around on a boat, baked in the sun, and possibly watered down by 3 different middlemen. Ordering wine here is a high-risk activity. You see, there are no sulfites added to preserve it. There are no corked glass bottles. Wine is stored in barrels, and once a barrel is broached, oxidation starts immediately. A tavern keeper with a slow-moving barrel of vintage Bordeaux is essentially selling you expensive vinegar. To hide this, unscrupulous vintners and tavern owners use a whole arsenal of additives that would make a modern health inspector faint. Is the wine too sour? Add honey or spices. Is it too pale? Add blackberry juice or crushed elderberries. Has it gone completely off? Some particularly creative fraudsters might add lead acetate, sugar of lead, to sweeten it up. It works like a charm for the flavor, but it does have the unfortunate side effect of slowly poisoning the customer's nervous system. So, when you see the merchant sipping his red wine, you aren't just seeing a display of wealth. You are seeing a man who trusts his immune system. If you were to approach the counter again and ask for wine, the alewife might point you toward a different barrel. You'd have a choice: red, usually harsh and tannic; white, often sweet and cloudy; or perhaps a sweet wine from the Mediterranean, like Malmsey, though that would likely be way out of your price range in a place with straw floors. But there is a third option, often overlooked by modern enthusiasts: small ale. This is the drink of children, the elderly, and those who need to operate heavy machinery or a plow later in the day. It's the second running of the grain, the result of pouring water over the mash after the strong ale has already been drained off. It has barely any alcohol, maybe 1% or 2%. It's hydrating, cheap, and boring. It's the medieval equivalent of a diet soda. Historians still argue whether the high consumption of alcohol in the Middle Ages meant everyone was constantly walking around with a buzz. Some estimates suggest the average person consumed a gallon of ale a day. That sounds like a perpetual keg stand. But if a large portion of that was small ale, they might have been perfectly functional. The buzz was likely a low-level, constant hum rather than a staggering drunkenness, just enough to make the cold, the mud, and the hard labor slightly more bearable. You look down at your own cup. The thick brown liquid is settling. You take another sip. It's growing on you. The Groot herbs give it a spicy kick that warms the back of your throat. It feels substantial, like a meal in itself. Suddenly, a bell rings nearby. Not a church bell, but a handbell. A man is walking through the tavern entrance, ringing it loudly. This is the town crier of the tavern world? No, it's a wine crier. In some cities, tavern owners would actually hire men to walk the streets or circulate through public spaces, carrying a sample of their latest shipment, offering tastes to lure people in. New Gascon wine, fresh tapped, come and taste. It's a living pop-up ad. The man offers a sample to the table next to you. A patron dips a finger in, tastes it, and grimaces. He waves the crier away. Smart man. He knows that fresh is a relative term. You decide to stick with your ale. It's honest, it's local, and you saw the woman who made it, which gives you a certain level of confidence, but the liquid courage is doing its job. The noise of the room feels less aggressive now. The smoke seems less choking. You are acclimating. However, the alcohol is also doing something else. It is waking up your appetite. The smell of the roasting meat is no longer just a background scent. It is a driving force. You watch a serving girl weave through the crowd, carrying a wooden bowl that is steaming in the cool air. It smells of onions, cabbage, and something meaty. Your stomach gives a loud, embarrassing growl that is fortunately drowned out by a lute player tuning his instrument in the corner. You realize you can't put this off any longer. You need solid food. But looking at the cauldron bubbling over the fire, you have to wonder, how long has that particular stew been cooking? Is it from today, yesterday, or is it the legendary Perpetual Stew that has been simmering since the reign of the previous king? You drain your cup, set it down on a sticky table edge, and prepare to investigate the culinary situation. It's time to face the pottage. Driven by the primal demands of your stomach, you navigate the obstacle course of outstretched legs and sleeping dogs to reach the epicenter of the tavern. The cauldron. Hanging from a heavy iron chain directly over the roaring fire, this black, soot-crusted vessel is the heart of the establishment. It is the altar at which everyone eventually worships. Inside, a thick, bubbling substance is slowly churning. This is pottage. If ale is liquid bread, pottage is solid fuel. It is the staple dish of the medieval diet, the culinary baseline for everyone from the lowliest peasant to the minor gentry. And the version bubbling before you is a perfect example of what is often called the perpetual stew. The concept is simple, brilliant, and slightly disturbing to the modern germ-conscious mind. The pot is rarely, if ever, fully emptied. The alewife or the cook simply adds to it. Did a hunter bring in a rabbit? In it goes. Did the garden yield some turnips? Toss them in. Is the liquid level getting low? Add water or ale. The result is a culinary continuum. Technically speaking, while the bulk of what you are about to eat was probably added today, there is a non-zero chance that you are about to consume a molecule of a cabbage that was chopped up last Tuesday. You are eating a history of the week's groceries in a single bowl. You watch as a bubble of gas rises to the surface of the thick gray-brown sludge, struggles against the viscosity of the liquid, and finally pops with a wet bloop. The smell is intense. It is overwhelmingly savory, a dense cloud of boiled onions, garlic, and leeks. These strong-smelling vegetables are often called potherbs, and they are the backbone of peasant cooking. In fact, garlic is so common in the diet of the lower classes that the upper crust often refers to it sneeringly as churl's treacle, a medicine for the poor. The nobility that tend to avoid these pungent roots, believing they incite passion and wind, neither of which is polite at court. But here in the tavern, nobody cares about your breath or your digestion. They care about warmth. You catch the eye of the serving girl, a different woman, perhaps the daughter of the alewife, and point to the cauldron. She nods and grabs a wooden ladle that looks like it has been used to paddle a canoe. She dips it into the morass. Meat or meager, she grunts. This is the Friday question. It is a fast day. In Catholic Europe, eating meat is forbidden on Wednesdays, Fridays, and during Lent. If today were a meat day, you might find chunks of salt pork or bacon floating in there. But since we are observing the rules, this is likely a meager pottage. That means it's thickened with oats or breadcrumbs and flavored with perhaps a bit of salt fish or just the memory of a ham bone that was dipped in and removed. She slops a generous portion into a wooden bowl. The sound it makes landing in the vessel, splat, suggests a texture somewhere between soup and mortar. She hands it to you. The bowl is warm, worn smooth by thousands of hands, and scrubbed with sand, but looking closely at the rim, you decide not to inspect the cleanliness too rigorously. The heat radiating from the pottage is the only sterilization you are going to get. You pay your penny, food is usually cash up front, and retreat to a corner to inspect your prize. The color is a murky green, thanks to the kaleidoscope of garden weeds that have been boiled into submission. You might see recognizable fragments of peas or beans. These are pulse, the dried legumes that keep the population alive through the winter. Now, as you stir the mixture with the spoon you hopefully brought with you, we'll get to that in a moment. You might be looking for the heavy spices, pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves. You won't find them. There is a persistent myth that medieval food was heavily spiced to mask the taste of rotting meat. You've probably heard this factoid repeated in classrooms or trivia nights. Historians still argue whether this idea has any basis in reality or if it is just a Victorian invention to look down on the past. The current consensus, however, leans heavily toward myth. Spices like pepper and cinnamon are exorbitantly expensive imports from the East. Using a month's wages worth of nutmeg to hide the taste of a spoiled chicken makes zero economic sense. It would be cheaper to just buy a fresh chicken. If the meat was bad, they threw it to the dogs. They didn't glitter bomb it with saffron. So your pottage is not a spice bomb. It is seasoned with what grows nearby: parsley, sage, mustard seeds, and perhaps a splash of vinegar or verjuice, the sour juice of unripe grapes, to give it a kick. You take a tentative spoonful. It's hot, lava hot. It clings to the roof of your mouth, burning the sensitive skin. But once you get past the thermal assault, the taste is comforting. It's earthy, salty, and incredibly filling. The oats have broken down to create a creamy texture that coats your stomach. It is comfort food in its most evolutionary sense. It tells your brain that you are safe, you are fed, and you will live to see the sunrise. There is also a fascinating medical dimension to this bowl of mush. Medieval medicine is based on the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health is a balance of these fluids, and food is the medicine used to adjust them. Pottage like this is considered warm and moist. In the damp, cold English autumn, your body is at risk of becoming cold and dry, melancholic, or cold and moist, phlegmatic. Eating this hot, liquid stew is literally a prescription to rebalance your internal thermostat. You aren't just having dinner, you are performing a medical intervention on yourself. As you eat, you notice something crunch between your teeth. Grit. It's unavoidable. The stone mills used to grind the grain, for the thickener often shed tiny particles of rock into the flour. Over a lifetime, this stone-ground diet grinds down the teeth of the medieval population. If you look at the siling man 2 tables over, you might notice his teeth are worn flat, like a horse's. That's the signature of the miller's stone. You scrape the bottom of the wooden bowl, chasing the last few peas. The heat from the food has spread to your fingers and toes. You feel heavy, sedated. The meat coma is setting in, even without the meat. This is the carbohydrate crash of the 14th century. But you can't just stand here holding an empty bowl. You need to sit. You need to integrate. You spot a gap on a bench near the wall, next to a group of travelers who look like they are sharing a meal. You move toward them, intending to slide in. But as you do, you realize that sitting down to eat involves a whole new set of unwritten rules. You have your bowl, but you don't have a plate, and you certainly don't have a fork. You are about to enter the minefield of medieval table manners. You slide onto the rough wooden bench, wedging yourself into a narrow gap between a burly man who smells of sawdust, likely a carpenter, and a hooded figure who is intensely focused on his ale. The table in front of you is a slab of oak, stained like with years of spills, and scrubbed with sand until the grain stands out like ridges on a map. There are no placemats, there are no napkins, and, most alarmingly to your modern sensibilities, there is no cutlery. You look around. In a modern restaurant, if the waiter forgets your silverware, you raise a hand and complain. Here, if you didn't bring your own silverware, you starve. Or, more accurately, you eat with your hands like a toddler. You reach to your belt. Assuming you dressed the part before you started this journey, you should have a sheath attached to your waist. Inside is your eating iron. This is a single-edged knife, usually with a wooden or bone handle. It is the medieval smartphone. Nobody leaves the house without it. It is your primary tool for everything: cutting rope, whittling wood, self-defense in a dark alley, and right now, spearing a chunk of questionable meat from a communal bowl. You pull it out. It's sharp. It has to be. Table knives with rounded tips haven't been invented yet. Legend has it that Cardinal Richelieu, centuries from now in France, will order knife tips ground down because he hates watching his guests pick their teeth with the sharp points at the dinner table. But here in 1350, dental hygiene is a high-stakes game. If you see someone picking their teeth with a dagger, you don't judge. You just hope they have a steady hand. You might be looking for a fork. Stop looking. You won't find one. In this era, the fork is a suspicious foreign object. It is known in Byzantium and Italy, but in Northern Europe, it is viewed with deep skepticism. There is a famous story about a Byzantine princess who married a Venetian doge in the 11th century and shocked everyone by using a golden fork to eat her food. The local clergy were horrified. They preached that God in his wisdom has provided man with natural forks, his fingers. Therefore, it is an insult to him to substitute artificial metal ones. The princess later died of a plague, and the church essentially said, "See, told you, the fork killed her. So, keep your hands where everyone can see them." You have 3 fingers on your right hand, thumb, index, middle, that are culturally designated as your eating utensils. The ring finger and pinky are to be kept clean, or at least cleaner, for dipping into the salt cellar. Now look at the plate the carpenter next to you is using. It isn't ceramic, it's bread. This is a trencher. It comes from the French verb trancher, to cut. It is a thick slice of bread, usually cut from a loaf that is 3 or 4 days old. This isn't the soft, fluffy sourdough you buy at a bakery. This is trencher bread, made from coarse flour and baked specifically to be dense and stale. It is structural engineering disguised as food. Its job is to act as an absorbent pad. When the serving girl brings out roasted meat or fish, she plops it directly onto this bread tile. The juices and grease soak into the bread, softening it as you eat the toppings. At the end of the meal, you have a choice. You can eat the gravy-soaked plate, which is delicious but heavy, or you can toss it into a basket for the alms to be given to the poor or the dogs. Since you are in a tavern and not a Lord's banquet, you'll probably eat the plate. Waste not, want not. But here is where the social anxiety really kicks in. You notice that there aren't enough trenchers for everyone. The carpenter looks at you, slices his massive trencher in half with his knife, and slides one piece toward you. You are now messmates. The word mess comes from the old French mies, meaning a portion of food. In the military and in taverns, people are grouped into messes of 2 or 4. You share a cup, you share a bowl, you share the bread. It is an incredibly intimate way to eat with a stranger. You have to trust that this man doesn't have a contagious disease. You have to trust that he won't hog the good bits of meat. You have to synchronize your dipping. This forced intimacy creates a complex code of etiquette. You might think a medieval tavern is a free-for-all, but it is actually governed by strict social rules, often taught in books of courtesy. Even if these peasants can't read the books, the cultural pressure trickles down. Rule number 1. Do not put your fingers into your ears or nose while eating. It seems obvious, but the fact that it had to be written down suggests it was a common problem. Rule number 2. Do not pet the dog with your eating hand. This is a tragedy, as there is a very good boy waiting under the table for scraps, but you must resist. Rule number 3. Do not spit on the table. Spitting on the floor is fine. Remember the rushes? But the table is sacred ground. Rule number 4. Do not put a bone that you have gnawed on back into the communal dish. Once it has touched your mouth, it is yours. Throw it on the floor. Historians still argue whether these etiquette rules were actually followed by the lower classes in a tavern setting, or if they were merely aspirational ideals written for young squires. Some archaeological evidence of table settings suggests a more chaotic reality, but court records of tavern brawls starting over bad manners suggest that people took these rules seriously. If you double dip in the communal sauce, you might not just get a dirty look, you might get punched. You observe the carpenter. He eats with a practiced efficiency. He cuts a piece of meat on his trencher. uses the knife point to stab it, and lifts it to his mouth. He wipes his greasy fingers on his coat. Napkins are a luxury, and clothing is the designated towel. You follow his lead. You pull a chunk of dark rye bread from your pouch to supplement the meal. The bread is dense. If you dropped it on your foot, it might bruise. You realize that your jaw muscles are getting a workout they haven't had since you tried that beef jerky in 2019. This is why medieval skeletons often show such robust jawlines. Chewing is a contact sport. As you chew, you watch a man across the table reach for the salt. Salt is precious. It's the primary preservative. A small wooden bowl of it sits in the center of the table. He takes a pinch with his clean fingers, remember, ring and pinky, and sprinkles it. He does not dip his meat directly into the salt cellar. That would be a capital offense. There is a rhythm to the room now. The initial chaos has settled into the steady thrum of chewing, swallowing, and drinking. The mess system works. By sharing food, the tension in the room lowers. It's hard to stab a man you are currently sharing a bread plate with. Breaking bread is literally a peace treaty. But as the hunger fades, your curiosity returns. You wipe your knife on a piece of crust. Cleaning it before you sheath it is crucial to prevent rust. And look around at the faces illuminated by the flickering rushlights. Who are these people? You've been focused on your own survival, your own bowl, your own knife. Now, you take a moment to really see the cast of characters sharing this smoky stage with you. It's not just locals. The tavern is a crossroads, a filter that catches the drifting debris of society. And looking closely at the group in the corner, you realize you are sitting next to some very strange bedfellows. Having wiped your knife clean and resheathed it, hopefully without nicking your belt or your thumb, you settle back against the rough wall. The acute panic of hunger has passed, replaced by that heavy, sleepy content that comes from a belly full of warm carbohydrates. Now, with the pressure off, you can indulge in the favorite pastime of tavern goers throughout history: people watching. The tavern is the great equalizer of the Middle Ages. In the outside world, society is rigidly stratified. You have the three estates: those who pray, the clergy; those who fight, the nobility; and those who work, the peasants. They are supposed to stay in their lanes. But in here, under the cover of smoke and shadows, those lanes merge. The tavern is a Venn diagram where the desperate, the devout, and the dangerous all overlap in search of a drink. Take a look at the man sitting 2 spots down from you. He's the one with the wide-brimmed felt hat that looks like it has seen better decades. Pinned to the brim is a small, tarnished pewter badge in the shape of a scallop shell. This is a pilgrim. But don't imagine a holy ascetic fasting in silence. Think of him more like a modern backpacker on a gap year, just with more religious guilt. The scallop shell marks him as someone who has walked the Camino de Santiago, the way of St. James in Spain. It is the ultimate status symbol of the medieval traveler. It says, "I have walked 1,000 miles, I have seen the ocean, and I have the calves to prove it." His hat is actually covered in souvenirs. There's a small vial, an ampulla from Canterbury, likely containing water of St. Thomas, which was water mixed with a microscopic drop of the saint's blood, or so the monks claimed. These badges are the bumper stickers of the 14th century. They are proof of travel. He is currently loudly recounting a story about a miracle he saw in Cologne, but if you listen closely, the details sound suspiciously like the plot of a dirty joke. Historians still argue whether the massive surge in pilgrimage during the late Middle Ages was driven by genuine spiritual piety or simply a desire for tourism. For the average serf bound to the land, a pilgrimage was the only legal excuse to leave their village, see the world, and have an adventure. It was a holy hall pass. Writers like Geoffrey Chaucer, with his rowdy Canterbury Tales, suggest that for many, the spiritual journey was just a thin cover for a spring break road trip. Across from the pilgrim sits a man who looks decidedly less relaxed. He is wearing a tunic of good quality broadcloth, dyed a deep, rich blue. This dye job is a tell. Blue requires woad, and deep blue requires a lot of it. He is a merchant, likely involved in the wool trade, which is the oil industry of medieval England. He keeps one hand resting protectively on the leather pouch at his belt. He is not here for the conversation. He is here for the intelligence. In a world without newspapers, stock tickers, or Twitter, the tavern is the only news source. He is listening to the pilgrim not for the holy stories, but for information about the roads. Are the bridges out in Kent? Are there bandits in the forests of Burgundy? Is the plague flaring up again in Bristol? His profit margins depend entirely on this gossip. But there is a quirky legal restriction hanging over this fashion-conscious merchant. It's called sumptuary law. The king and parliament are obsessed with people dressing above their station. There are literal laws dictating who is allowed to wear what fur, what color, and what fabric. Ermine is for royalty. Silk is for the super rich. If this merchant wears a particular pointy shoe or a specific cut of hood that is reserved for a knight, he can be fined. The government is essentially running a fashion police force to ensure that you can tell how important someone is just by glancing at their outfit. In the dim light of the tavern, however, it's hard to tell silk from polished linen, so a lot of sartorial crimes are being committed right in under your nose. Then there is the noisy group near the fire. They are young, rowdy, and speaking a weird mix of English and bad Latin. These are Goliards, wandering students or clerics who have dropped out of the university system or are between orders. They are the intellectual punks of the era. They are educated enough to write poetry, but poor enough to sing for their supper. They are likely singing a drinking song right now. A popular one from this time is In Taberna Quando Sumus, when we are in the tavern. The lyrics are surprisingly nihilistic. They sing about how, in the tavern, death comes for everyone, rich or poor, so you might as well drink. It's a medieval YOLO anthem. They are annoying the merchant, fascinating the pilgrim, and terrifying the alewife, who knows that they probably don't have any money. But the most interesting person in the room is the one you almost didn't notice. Tucked into the darkest corner, nursing a single cup of small ale that he hasn't taken a sip from in 20 minutes, is a man who is watching everyone else. He wears generic clothing, brown wool, nothing distinctive. He blends in. He is a listener. In 1350, with the 100 Years' War dragging on and political factions constantly maneuvering, the country is crawling with informers. Local lords pay men to sit in taverns and listen for sedition. The sheriff pays men to listen for confessions of poaching. The king's agents listen for talk of rebellion. Paranoia is a survival skill here. There is a common medieval proverb: the fields have eyes and the woods have ears. In the tavern, the walls have ears too. That's why you might notice two men leaning in close, whispering. their hands cupped over their mouths. They aren't being romantic. They are practicing operational security. You shift on the bench, realizing that your casual conversation with the carpenter about the weather was probably the safest choice. You decide to avoid eye contact with the listener in the corner. Suddenly, the dynamic of the room shifts. The eating is mostly done. The wooden bowls are being collected or licked clean by the dogs. The heavy, sleepy atmosphere of digestion is giving way to a restless energy. The alcohol is kicking in. The volume is rising. The group of students has cleared a space on their table. The merchant has stopped clutching his purse quite so tightly and is leaning in to watch. The pilgrim has stopped talking about saints and is reaching into his pouch. They are bringing out the dice. You might think of gambling as a vice of the modern era, Vegas lights and slot machines. But the medieval obsession with gambling is ferocious. It is the primary form of entertainment, and it is rampant. Kings gamble, bishops gamble quietly, and peasants gamble. You hear the distinct rattle of bone against wood. It's a sharp, percussive sound that cuts through the murmur of conversation. Clack, rattle, thud. The game is starting. And looking at the intensity in the eyes of the players, you realize this isn't just a friendly game of Uno. Money, hard-earned, scarce silver, is about to change hands. And where money changes hands in a room full of drunk men with knives, tension follows close behind. You lean forward, drawn in by the spectacle. It's time to learn how to play hazard. The energy in the tavern has now focused into a tight, vibrating knot around a single table near the fire. You leave your spot on the bench and drift closer, drawn by the rhythmic clatter-thud and the collective intake of breath from the spectators. The mess of dinner is forgotten. The mess of financial ruin is about to begin. They are playing hazard. If the name sounds ominous, that's because it is. This is the great-grandfather of the modern casino game, craps, but it is infinitely more complicated and frankly more headache-inducing. The name comes from the Arabic word al-zar, meaning the die, brought back to Europe by crusaders who apparently spent as much time gambling in the Holy Land as they did fighting. The setup is simple. There is no green felt table. There are no rakes. There is just the scarred oak surface, cleared of trenchers and spilled ale. The players are hunched over, eyes locked on the center of the wood. The equipment is primitive. The dice aren't the perfectly balanced, translucent red cubes you know. They are made of bone, usually the knuckle bone of a sheep or a pig, filed down into a cube. They are yellowish-white, porous, and inevitably uneven. Because they are hand-carved, no two dice are exactly the same weight. One might have a slight bias toward rolling of a 6. Another might favor the 3. This adds a layer of physics to the game that modern gamblers don't have to deal with. A seasoned player doesn't just know the odds. He knows the specific personality of the dice he is throwing. The rules of hazard are a mathematical labyrinth. The caster, the shooter, calls a number between 5 and 9. This is the main. He then rolls 2 dice. If he rolls the main, he wins. This is a nick. If he rolls a 2 or a 3, he loses. This is throwing out. But it gets tricky. If he rolls a number other than the main or a losing number, that new number becomes his chance. He then has to keep rolling until he hits his chance, win, or his main, lose. If your eyes just glazed over, you are in good company. Historians still argue whether the average illiterate peasant actually understood the complex probability curves of hazard, or if they just memorized the patterns. 7 is good, 2 is bad. Keep throwing until the money moves. You watch the merchant take the dice. He shakes them in his fist. There is no cup here, and throws them hard against the table. Crack. They spin and settle. A 5 and a 2, 7. "Nick!" someone shouts. The merchant grins and scoops up a pile of silver pennies. The pilgrim groans and tosses another coin into the center. Now, here is the dark side of the game. You might notice the Goliard student watching the dice like a hawk. He isn't just looking at the numbers. He is looking for the Fulhams. Fulhams is medieval slang for loaded dice. The name comes from the London district of Fulham, which was apparently notorious in the 14th century as a hub for manufacturing crooked gambling gear. There are high men loaded to roll 4, 5, or 6, and low men loaded to roll 1, 2, or 3. Some are weighted with quicksilver, mercury, injected into a hollowed-out center. Others are bristle dice, which have a short hog's bristle sticking out of one side to prevent them from landing on a specific face. Cheating at dice isn't a minor infraction here. It's a quick way to get stabbed. If you are caught using Fulhams, the punishment is poetic and brutal. There are records of cheaters being depilloried with their throat pinned to the wood, or worse, having the false dice perforated and tied through their nostrils like a nose ring for public shaming. But despite the risk, everyone plays, and they bet on everything. They bet their coins. When the coins run out, they bet their possessions: a cloak, a dagger, a belt buckle. In extreme cases, men have been known to bet their own clothing, stripping down to their linen undergarments in the middle of winter, walking home naked as a needle. There is a quirky religious workaround happening here too. Technically, the church forbids gambling. It is a sin of avarice, but the church is also practical, so you often see a tithe of the winnings being set aside. If a player wins a big pot, he might toss a penny into a specific box destined for the local parish or to buy a candle for the Virgin Mary. It's a spiritual bribe. Sorry for the sinning, God. Here's 10% of the profit. As the game heats up, the language gets colorful. You hear curses invoking every saint in the calendar, and some very creative insults involving livestock. This is tavern talk, a dialect of profanity that is surprisingly rich. If someone calls you a lunglark, they mean you're a morning person, annoying. If they call you a quackerwudger, you are a wooden puppet, someone easily manipulated. The tension at the table spikes. The merchant has just lost 3 throws in a row. His face is flushing a dangerous shade of purple. He slams his hand down. "The dice are false," he roars, pointing a trembling finger at the student. The room goes dead silent. The lute player stops strumming. The dog stops chewing its flea. Accusing someone of false play is the nuclear option. The student stands up, his hands held out, palms open. "Check them yourself, master merchant," he sneers, pushing the bone cubes across the wood. The merchant grabs them, holding them up to the rushlight, squinting for the telltale plug of a mercury injection. The alewife is already moving. She has seen this movie before. She grabs a heavy wooden cudgel from behind the barrels. She doesn't care who started it. She just cares about her furniture. The merchant pauses. He weighs the dice. He finds nothing. He grunts, tosses them back, and sits down. "Play on," he mutters. The tension breaks like a snapped bowstring. The noise rushes back in. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. That was close. Violence in a tavern is common, fast, and messy. There are coroner's rolls from this era, filled with inquests that start with, "They were in the tavern drinking," and end with, "And then he struck him with a quart pot." You decide to step back from the blast zone. Watching the gambling is thrilling, but participating is a surefire way to lose your shirt, literally. You retreat to the periphery, leaning against a support beam. But as the hour grows later, the atmosphere in the room is shifting again. The casual drinking is turning into serious drinking. The noise is becoming a roar, and this escalation brings us to the inevitable buzzkill of the medieval night, the law. Because contrary to popular belief, the medieval tavern is not a 24-hour party zone. There are rules, there are clocks, sort of, and there is a very strict curfew approaching. The gambling crisis has been averted, and the dice are clattering again, but the near brawl has changed the vibe of the room. It served as a reminder that chaos is always bubbling just beneath the surface. To keep the lid on that chaos, the medieval world relies on a web of regulations that would make a modern homeowners association look anarchic. You might think the Middle Ages were a time of lawless freedom, but in reality, you are currently standing in one of the most regulated spaces in the city. Suddenly, a sound cuts through the tavern noise, distant at first, then growing louder, clang, clang, clang. It is the church bell, but this isn't a call to prayer, it is the curfew. The word comes from the French phrase couvre-feu, literally, cover the fire. In a city built of kindling, this bell is the command to damp down your hearths and get off the streets. In London, for example, the curfew bell usually rings at 8 o'clock p.m. or 9 o'clock p.m., depending on the season. When that bell stops ringing, the city gates are locked. The tavern doors are supposed to be bolted. If you are found wandering the streets after curfew without a very good reason and a light, you can be arrested by the night watch. The alewife looks up at the sound. She doesn't immediately kick everyone out. Profit is still profit, but she does start eyeing the rowdier patrons. She is liable for you. If a fight breaks out here and spills into the street after curfew, she gets fined. If you murder someone in her establishment, she gets fined. If you are a known criminal and she serves you, she gets fined. Basically, her entire business model is dodging fines. This brings us to the view of frank pledge. It's a legal system where every man is responsible for the behavior of his neighbors. If you are in a tithing, a group of 10 households, and one of your group commits a crime and runs away, the other 9 of you have to pay his fine. This creates a society of aggressive busybodies. Everyone is watching everyone else because your neighbor's bad behavior literally costs you money. In the tavern, this means that if the Goliard student starts throwing punches, the merchant and the pilgrim might jump on him, not out of heroism, but to save their own skins. You notice a man near the door adjusting his belt. He is hiding his dagger. This is another rule, keeping the king's peace. Many towns have strict ordinances about carrying weapons in establishments selling ale. In 13th century London, there were specific laws forbidding anyone from walking the streets with a sword or an axe after curfew. But look around. Everyone is armed. The carpenter has his tools. The merchant has a dagger. You have your eating knife. The ban is virtually unenforceable. The tavern keeper's solution is usually to just confiscate the big stuff. If a knight walked in with a broadsword, she might ask him to leave it behind the bar. But for the small blades, it's an honor system that works until the ale runs out. Historians still argue whether these weapon bans were ever effective, or if they were just a way to add extra charges after a crime was already committed. You are charged with assault and, bonus charge, carrying a pointy stick after 9 p.m. The alewife taps a keg with a wooden mallet, a signal that the last call is approaching. This concept is ancient, but unlike a modern bar where the lights come on and music stops, here the process is a slow withdrawal of hospitality. She stops pouring the good ale and offers only the dregs. The fire is allowed to die down, letting the creeping cold of the night reclaim the room. There is also a fascinating guest law you should be aware of. If you stay in this tavern, or an inn, for 1 night, you are a stranger. If you stay 2 nights, you are a guest. If you stay 3 nights, you are considered a resident, and the tavern keeper becomes legally responsible for your actions. This is why many landlords are hesitant to let you stay for a long weekend. By day 3, you are practically family, legally speaking. Suddenly, the door bangs open. A gust of freezing wind swirls the smoke, making the rushlights flicker. 2 men walk in, wearing thick padded jackets, gambesons, and carrying heavy wooden staves. They look like they haven't slept in a week. This is the Night Watch. They are the medieval police force, but don't imagine professional officers. These are regular citizens, bakers, weavers, chandlers, who have been conscripted to patrol the streets for the night. It is an unpaid, dangerous, and hated duty. They are tired, they are cold, and they are looking for troublemakers to harass. They scan the room. The gambling table goes quiet. The student hides the dice. The merchant looks busy with his drink. The watchmen aren't looking for a fight. They are just doing a head count. They exchange a few words with the alewife, probably checking that she hasn't harbored any fugitives, and accept a complimentary mug of small ale. This is the bribe that keeps the economy of justice turning. Satisfied that no revolution is brewing, they leave, taking the cold draft with them. The door slams shut. The room exhales. But the visit from the watch is a signal. The night is officially late. The respectable people, the merchant, the pilgrim, are starting to think about sleep. The unrespectable people are just getting started, but they will have to take their party elsewhere or hush up. You realize that your bladder is full. You've had 2 pints of ale and a bowl of watery pottage. The biological clock is ticking louder than the curfew bell. You look around for a restroom sign. You won't find one. There is no door marked gents. In a castle, you might find a guard-robe, a stone chute emptying into a moat. In a monastery, you might find a communal latrine block with running water. Monks were surprisingly advanced plumbers. But in a town tavern, you have 2 choices: a bucket in the corner, which is currently occupied by a very drunk man, or the backyard. You catch the alewife's eye and mime your predicament. She points a thumb toward a back door, a smaller, lower opening than the main entrance. It leads to the curtilage, the enclosed yard behind the building. You brace yourself. You are about to leave the warmth of the fire and the relative safety of the crowd to venture into the dark, cold, and biologically hazardous reality of medieval sanitation. You pull your cloak tight, grab your eating knife, just in case the rats are bold tonight, and head for the back door. It's time to visit the privy. You push open the back door and are immediately slapped in the face by the cold night air. The transition is brutal. You go from the smoky, humid oven of the tavern to a freezing, pitch-black void. The door creaks shut behind you, and for a moment, you are blind. You are standing in the curtilage, the enclosed backyard of the tenement. This is the service engine of the house. As your eyes adjust to the starlight and the faint glow from the neighbor's window, shapes begin to emerge. There is a lean-to shed where firewood is stacked. There is a water butt catching runoff from the roof, and there is the smell. If the street smelled of mud and animals, and the tavern smelled of smoke and sweat, the backyard smells of pure biological decay. You are standing next to the midden. The midden is the household compost heap, but that polite modern term doesn't do it justice. This is where everything goes. Broken pottery, floor sweepings, kitchen scraps, stable waste, and ash from the fire. In theory, this pile is periodically collected by rakers or gong farmers, night soil men, and carted out of the city to fertilize the fields. In practice, it often sits here for months, fermenting. You tread carefully. The ground here is treacherous. You don't want to slip. A fall here would be catastrophic. You navigate around a pile of what looks like discarded barrel staves and head toward the structure at the far end of the yard. This is the privy. It is a small wooden shack, often perched precariously over a deep hole in the ground, the cesspit. Medieval cities like London have strict regulations about these pits. They are supposed to be lined with stone or timber to prevent leakage into the neighbors' cellars or, God forbid, the local water table. A standard regulation requires the pit to be at least 2.5 feet away from a neighbor's property line if it is stone-lined, or 3.5 feet if it is unlined. There are countless court cases from this era where neighbors sue each other because a cesspit has overflowed or burst its bounds and flooded a basement with sewage. It is the most common and disgusting litigation of the Middle Ages. You reach the shack. There is no door, just a privacy screen of woven hazel or perhaps an old sack hanging from a nail. You step inside. The seat is a wooden bench with a hole cut in it. It is simple, functional, and cold. In some fancier establishments, you might find a two-holer, allowing for a sociable chat while you do your business, but this is a solo mission. You peer down into the darkness. It is a long way down. Historians still argue whether the popular image of medieval people simply relieving themselves in the streets is accurate. While chamber pots were certainly emptied out of windows, accompanied by the shout of "Gardes low, watch out for the water," most households tried to use designated pits like this one. The problem wasn't a lack of trying, it was a lack of capacity. As the population boomed, the pits filled up faster than the gong farmers could empty them. Now, you reach the most critical part of the process. The paperwork, or rather, the lack thereof. Toilet paper is a futuristic invention, centuries away from widespread use in Europe. The Chinese have invented it by now, but the news hasn't traveled along the Silk Road yet. So, what do you use? If you are rich, you might use wool, lace, or hemp. If you are a Roman senator, time traveling a bit further back, you might use a sponge on a stick soaked in vinegar. But here, in a tavern yard in 1350, you use what is available. Hay is a popular choice. Straw is a bit scratchy but effective. Gong fern, or moss, is the luxury option, soft and absorbent. But often, you rely on the torch cull, literally arse wipe, which might be a smooth stone, a ceramic shard rounded by water, pessary, or simply a handful of dried leaves. You look around the shack. There is a basket of hay in the corner. You sigh. It will have to do. As you finish up, you hear a rustle in the thatch above your head. Rats. They love these places. The cesspit is warm. It's full of organic matter, and it's safe from cats. You decide not to linger. Stepping back out into the yard, you notice something else near the midden heap. It's a garden patch. This is the herber. Despite the grim sanitation, medieval people are avid gardeners. Growing right next to the waste pile are sage, mint, fennel, and parsley. It's a closed-loop system. The waste fertilizes the soil grows the herbs flavor the pottage, and the pottage eventually ends up back in the pit. It is efficient, sustainable, and slightly nauseating if you think about it too hard. You wash your hands, well, you rinse them, in the water butt. The water is freezing, covered in a thin film of ice. You shake them dry, shivering violently now. The cold has soaked through your tunic. You hurry back to the tavern door. The light spilling out from the cracks looks inviting. You push the door open and slip back inside. The wall of heat and noise hits you again, but this time you welcome it. You have survived the backyard. You are lighter, colder, but ready for the final challenge of the night. You look at the patrons. The gambling has stopped. The merchant has left. The pilgrim is asleep, his head on the table, drooling onto his scallop shell badge. The alewife is dousing the rushlights, plunging the corners of the room into darkness. It is time to sleep, but you don't have a room key. You don't have a reservation. You have a spot on the floor, or if you are lucky, or unlucky, depending on your perspective, a spot in the communal bed. You step back into the tavern, shivering, the cold of the privy still clinging to your skin like a damp shroud. But the room you return to is not the same one you left. The transformation is subtle but total. The energy has shifted from public house to communal bedroom. The high-volume roar of gambling and drinking has dissolved into a low, rustling murmur. The alewife and her serving girl are moving through the room with efficient brutality, clearing the trestle tables and stacking the benches against the walls. In a modern hotel, this is the part where you would go to the front desk, get a key card, and take the elevator to room 304 for some private relaxation. Here, room 304 is just a patch of floor near the fire, and your roommate is everyone. For the patrons who have only a farthing to their name, the laborers, the poorest travelers, the sleeping arrangement is simple, the floor. They curl up in the rushes, wrapping their cloaks tight around themselves, finding a spot near the dying embers of the hearth. They look like a pile of laundry that has been left to dry. It's not comfortable, but it's warm, and it's better than the street. But you have a little coin left. You are a person of substance. You have paid a whole penny for the privilege of a bed. You look toward the far wall, where the shadows are deepest. There, pushed into the corner, is the tavern's pride and joy, the great bed. It is a massive piece of furniture, a wooden frame as big as a small boat, made of heavy oak. It looks sturdy enough to hold an elephant, which is good because it is currently holding 4 grown men. And there is a gap, a narrow, inviting, slightly terrifying gap, right in the middle. That is your spot. You approach the bed. The mattress isn't memory foam. It is a tick, a large linen sack, stuffed tight with straw or chaff. Over time, the straw breaks down, gets pulverized into dust, and shifts to the edges, leaving the center hard and lumpy. To counteract this, the bed is held up by a lattice of ropes woven across the wooden frame. You might have heard the phrase sleep tight and been told it refers to tightening these bed ropes with a special tool to stop the mattress from sagging. It's one of those perfect historical factoids that everyone loves. Unfortunately, it is linguistically suspect. Historians still argue whether the phrase refers to the ropes or simply the idea of sleeping soundly, tightly, as the expression appears much later than the rope beds themselves. But looking at the sagging, hammock-like shape of the mattress before you, you certainly hope someone has tightened the ropes recently. Now comes the awkward part, the undressing. In the 21st century, we have a very specific idea of modesty. In the 14th century, modesty is a flexible concept. When it's freezing, most people sleep naked. It's practical. It keeps your lice-ridden day clothes away from the bed linens, and it allows your skins to breathe. However, wearing a linen shift or a chemise is also common for travelers. You watch the merchant, who has already claimed a prime spot near the headboard. He is stripping down to his linen undershirt. He takes off his hose, his tunic, and his boots. But he keeps one item on, his hat. This is the nightcap. It's not just a fashion statement from a Charles Dickens novel, it is a thermal necessity. You lose a significant amount of body heat through your head. In a room where the temperature will drop to near freezing by 3 o'clock a.m., keeping your head warm is the difference between a good night's sleep and waking up with a head cold. The merchant pulls his tight white coif down over his ears, looking like a grumpy baby. You follow suit, removing your heavy outer layers. You feel incredibly vulnerable. You are about to climb into a confined space with strangers, minus the armor of your clothing. You clutch your pouch, the one with your money, tightly. Where do you put it? You can't leave it on the floor. You see the pilgrim tucking his dagger and his purse underneath the bolster, a long, log-shaped pillow that runs the width of the bed. This is standard procedure. You sleep on your valuables. If a thief wants your money, they have to literally lift your head to get it. It adds a literal meaning to sleeping on it. You climb in. The mattress rustles loudly, crinkle, crunch, announcing your arrival. You slide into the gap between the pilgrim and the merchant. The first thing you notice is the heat. It is intense. A human body acts as a 100-watt heater. Sandwiched between two of them, you are immediately enveloped in warmth. It is actually quite pleasant, until you think about the source. You are sharing the intimate bio-warmth of a man you met 3 hours ago. Then comes the smell. The lavender that the alewife supposedly sprinkled on the sheets is fighting a losing battle against the scent of unwashed wool, stale ale, and feet. It is a pungent, intimate atmosphere. This arrangement is completely normal to them. The concept of the private bedroom is a luxury for kings and queens. For everyone else, sleeping is a communal activity. Servants sleep at the foot of their master's bed. Families sleep in one pile. Travelers sleep in heaps. The word bedfellow isn't a metaphor here. It is a literal description of your relationship with the random guy next to you. As you settle in, trying to find a position that doesn't involve your elbow in the merchant's ribs, you notice a long, smooth stick leaning against the bed frame. It looks like a broom handle without the broom. This is the bed staff. This object has a dual purpose. By day, it is used to smooth out the lumps in the straw mattress and tuck in the sheets. By night, it is a weapon. If a rat scuttles across the coverlet, or if a thief tries to slit the purse strings of the sleeping merchant, the bedstaff is there to deliver a swift crack to the skull. It is the medieval equivalent of a baseball bat under the bed. The merchant grunts, shifting in his sleep, and flings an arm across your chest. You gently remove it. This is the etiquette of the shared bed. Minimize contact, share the warmth, don't hog the blanket. Ah yes, the blanket. It is a heavy, scratchy wool textile called a happer or a coverlet. It is heavy enough to crush you, which is good for trapping heat, but it is also a communal resource. If the man on the far end rolls over and pulls the blanket, everyone freezes. It is a zero-sum game of thermal dynamics. You lie there, staring up at the dark timber beams of the ceiling, listening to the breathing of the room. It's a rhythmic chorus of snores, wheezes, and mutters. You are safe, you are warm, but you probably won't sleep through the night. This brings us to the phenomenon of the two sleeps. In the pre-industrial world, before electric lighting condensed our rest into one solid 8-hour block, human sleep was often biphasic. People would go to bed early, around 9 hunquaq or 10 hunquaq p.m. They would sleep for about 4 hours. This was the first sleep, or dead sleep. Then, around midnight or 1 hunquaq a.m., they would wake up naturally. During this waking period, known as the watch, people didn't just toss and turn, they were active. In a household, they might check the fire, pee, pray, or have sex. Physicians actually recommended this time as the best for conception, as the body was rested. In a tavern like this, you might hear people murmuring in the dark, telling stories, or just lying quietly in a meditative state. Then, after an hour or so, they would fall back asleep for the second sleep until dawn. So, when you wake up in a few hours, don't panic. You don't have insomnia. You are just experiencing the natural rhythm of the medieval body. But for now, you are drifting off into the first sleep. The ale is heavy in your blood. The pottage is sitting like a warm stone in your stomach. The heat from the pilgrim is seeping into your cold side. Your eyes grow heavy. The sounds of the tavern fade, the crackle of the fire, the wind rattling the shutters, the soft scritch-scratch of a mouse in the rushes. You are just about to cross the threshold into unconsciousness when you feel a sharp, piercing sensation on your ankle, then another on your wrist, then another on your neck. You freeze. You are not alone in this bed. The microscopic residents have realized that fresh meat has arrived. You are awake, wide awake, and you are scratching. The romantic image of the medieval night, the peaceful slumber under a heavy wool blanket, the firelight flickering on the walls, has just collided with the biological reality of the 14th century. You are currently the main course at an all-you-can-eat banquet for the tavern's permanent residents. We are talking about the unholy trinity of medieval pests, fleas, lice, and bedbugs. The sensation starts as a tickle, a ghost of a movement on your shin. You ignore it, hoping it's just the straw mattress shifting. Then comes the bite, sharp, sudden, and blindingly itchy. Your hand shoots down under the coverlet to scratch, but as soon as you deal with your shin, you feel a prick on your shoulder blade, then your lower back. You are fighting a war on multiple fronts against an enemy you cannot see. The flea, Pulex irritans, is the most active of your bedmates. These are athletic, jumping predators. They live in the rush floor we walked on earlier, and at night, they commute up the legs of the bed to feed on the warm bodies sleeping there. They are democratic parasites. They bite the merchant and the pilgrim, with equal enthusiasm. Then there are the lice. These are more intimate. They live in the seams of clothing, specifically the wool and linen layers everyone is wearing. Since people don't change their clothes often, and certainly don't boil wash them daily, the lice have established a thriving civilization in the pleats of the merchant's tunic. By sleeping pressed against him, you have essentially opened your borders to immigration. And finally, the heavy artillery, the bedbug, Simex lectularius. These don't jump, they crawl. They live in the woodwork of the bed frame and the crevices of the wattle and daub walls. They smell like coriander, cilantro when crushed. If you catch a sudden whiff of fresh herbs in the middle of the night, it's not the chef starting early. It's likely you just rolled over on a nest of bugs. In the modern world, finding a bedbug in a hotel is grounds for a refund, a lawsuit, and a 1-star review. Here, it is simply Tuesday. Everyone has them. Kings have them. Nuns have them. Even the Pope scratches. There is a famous story about Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was murdered in his cathedral in 1170. When the monks stripped his body to prepare it for burial, they found his hair shirt, a rough garment worn for penance, was seething with lice. The monks didn't recoil in horror, they gasped in admiration. To them, enduring that level of constant physical irritation was a sign of extreme holiness. You, however, are not feeling particularly holy right now. You are just feeling itchy. You try to employ the standard medieval countermeasures. You squeeze your eyes shut and try to think cold thoughts, as some physicians believe heat attracts the bugs. You might wish you had some wormwood or flea-bane herbs to scatter in the sheets, as recommended by the housekeeping manuals of the time. But alas, you are defenseless. Historians still argue whether the wealthy actually wore flea furs, known as zibellini, small pelts of ermine or marten worn around the neck or wrist. The theory, popular in museum tours, is that the fleas would be attracted to the thick fur of the animal pelt rather than the human, acting as a sort of decoy magnet. While it's a clever idea, recent scholarship suggests these were just fashion statements, and the flea trap function is a later myth invented to explain why rich people walked around carrying dead weasels. As you lie there, resigned to your fate as a blood donor, you become aware of the second torment of the night, the soundscape. The room is dark, but it is not silent. It is roaring. You are sandwiched between the merchant and the pilgrim, and both of them are champion snorers. The merchant produces a deep, wet, rumbling sound, like a cart losing a wheel in a muddy rut. It vibrates through the mattress, shaking your ribs. On your other side, the pilgrim is a whistler. Every exhale is a high-pitched fee that sounds like a boiling tea kettle. Across the room, someone grinds their teeth, a dry, rhythmic scritch that sets your nerves on edge. Someone else is talking in their sleep, muttering about the price of onions. A dog barks in its sleep, its legs twitching as it chases a dream rabbit. This is the acoustic reality of communal sleeping. There is no soundproofing, no white noise machine. You are trapped in a symphony of respiratory distress. And then suddenly the rhythm breaks. The merchant snorts, rolls over, and sits up. The pilgrim stirs. A few other shadows in the room sit up. It is the middle of the night, perhaps 1 o'clock a.m. You have entered the watch. As we mentioned, this is the waking period between the first sleep and the second sleep. In a modern context, waking up at 1 o'clock a.m. is a nuisance. Here, it is a scheduled event. The room doesn't fully wake up, nobody is lighting a torch, but there is a shift in consciousness. The merchant reaches for a water skin hanging on the bedpost and takes a long swig. He wipes his mouth and looks at you, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. "Cold night," he whispers. It's not a complaint, just an observation. "Aye," you whisper back. "Roads were bad near Oxford," he murmurs, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Mud up to the axle. So I heard." This is the magic of the watch. In the vulnerability of the dark, the social barriers lower even further. The merchant, who was guarding his purse so tightly earlier, is now just a tired man sharing a moment of consciousness. He isn't trying to sell you anything. He isn't suspicious. He is just existing in the quiet gap between dreams. Across the room, you hear the low murmur of prayers. Someone is using this time to recite their Pater Noster. The rhythmic Latin mumbling acts as a lullaby. This segmented sleep pattern might actually be the natural human state. Without artificial light to force our bodies into a single 8-hour block, we drift into this 2-part rhythm. During this hour of wakefulness, your brain feels different. You feel a strange, calm clarity. The anxiety of the day, the mud, the cold, the strange food, seems distant. You are in a liminal space, floating in the velvet darkness of the 14th century. You take this opportunity to adjust your position. You flip the heavy coverlet, trying to find a cool spot that hasn't been preheated by the pilgrim. You scratch a particularly aggressive bite on your ankle. The itching has dulled to a background thrum, a constant noise that your brain is learning to filter out. The conversation dies down. The merchant sighs, a long, heavy exhale that signals the end of the watch. He lies back down, pulls his nightcap tight, and turns his back to you. Within minutes, the rumbling snore returns. The pilgrim joins in with his tea kettle whistle. The orchestra tunes up for the second movement. You close your eyes. The exhaustion is heavier now. The second sleep is creeping up on you. It feels deeper, heavier than the first. It is a black tide pulling you under. You think about the world outside the tavern walls, the empty, muddy streets, the shuttered houses, the silent church tower, the night watch shivering on their patrol. You are lucky to be here in this flea-ridden, snoring, smelly wooden box. You are warm. You are safe. You are part of the pack. Your thoughts begin to fragment. The snoring sounds less like noise and more like the ocean. The smell of wood smoke and wool becomes the bell of home. You drift. You float. And then, just as you are fully submerged, a new sound pierces the veil. Not a snore, not a bell. Cock-a-doodle-doo. It is a rooster, and he is close. In fact, given the thinness of the walls and the proximity of the backyard, he sounds like he is screaming directly into your ear canal. You groan. The concept of a snooze button is 600 years away. The rooster doesn't care about your sleep cycle. He doesn't care that you were up scratching at 2 o'clock a.m. He knows the sun is coming, and he is going to make sure every living thing in the parish knows it too. The room groans in unison. The collective beast of the tavern is waking up. The second sleep is over. The day has begun, whether you like it or not. The rooster's scream is the opening bell, but the tavern doesn't wake up all at once. It's a slow, groaning resurrection. Around you, the pile of humanity stirs. The merchant sits up, rubbing a hand over his face, his nightcap now askew. The pilgrim hacks a wet, rattling cough that sounds like he's trying to expel a demon. The Goliard student, who apparently lost his shirt in the dice game, is shivering in the corner, looking very much like he regrets every life choice that led him to this moment. You sit up. Every joint in your body protests. The straw mattress, which felt relatively soft 8 hours ago, has compressed into a hard, lumpy topography that has left a map of bruises on your ribs. Your neck is stiff. Your mouth tastes like you drank a gallon of unhopped yeast water and slept in a room with 50 other people, which, to be fair, is exactly what you did. The alewife is already up. She is the engine that never stops. You hear the heavy thud-thud of her unbarring the front door. Then, with a creak that sounds like a gunshot in the quiet room, the heavy oak door swings open. The effect is instant and cruel. The soft, forgiving amber glow of the firelight is obliterated by a shaft of gray, merciless morning light. It cuts through the smoky haze like a laser. Suddenly, the romance of the medieval tavern evaporates. In the daylight, you can see the cobwebs hanging from the rafters. You can see the grease stains on the walls. You can see the true state of the rush floor, and let's just say Erasmus was right. The magic is gone. Only the grime remains. You crawl out of the great bed, your feet hitting the cold rushes. You fumble for your boots. They are stiff, the leather hardened by the drying mud from yesterday's trek. Jamming your feet into them is a struggle, a wrestling match between warm flesh and cold cowhide. You stand up, stomping to get the blood flowing, and join the queue for the water bucket near the door. There is no shower. There is no toothbrush. Hygiene this morning is a lick and a promise. You cup your hands, splash freezing water on your face, and wipe it dry with your sleeve. To clean your teeth, you might grab a rough linen cloth and rub your gums vigorously, or perhaps chew on a twig of hazel or a mint leaf if you saved one from dinner. It's not minty fresh, but it removes the furry feeling from your teeth. Now, your stomach wakes up. It demands tribute. You head to the table where the serving girl is putting out the morning spread. This brings us to the great breakfast debate. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually sat down for a formal breakfast. For a long time, scholars believed that the church and the nobility frowned upon eating early in the day, viewing it as a sign of gluttony or weakness. The proper first meal was dinner at around 11 a.m. However, recent analysis of labor records and household accounts suggests that while the nobility might have slept in, the working class and travelers like you absolutely fueled up. You can't walk 20 miles or plow a field on an empty stomach. But don't expect pancakes and eggs. The menu is redundant. It is bread and ale, again. You grab a chunk of brown bread. It's a bit stale, perhaps a survivor from last night's trenchers. To make it palatable, you practice the ancient art of the sup. You break the bread into small pieces and drop them into your mug of weak ale. The liquid softens the hard crust, creating a sort of alcoholic porridge. It sounds unappealing to modern palates, but as you spoon the soggy, malt-soaked bread into your mouth, it's surprisingly satisfying. It's warm, it's caloric, and the small ale, low alcohol, gives you hydration without getting you drunk at 7 a.m. This is the morning draft. It is the medieval equivalent of coffee, a ritualistic start to the day that wakes up the system. As you eat, you watch the room transform back into a business. The benches are moved back into place, the fire is stoked, the cat is proudly displaying a dead mouse near the hearth, her invoice for the night's security services. Then comes the moment of truth, the reckoning. The alewife approaches you. She doesn't have a cash register or an iPad. She has a memory like a steel trap, and, for the regulars, a tally stick. This is a fascinating piece of financial technology. It's a hazel twig. When a customer buys a drink on credit, she makes notches in the wood to represent the debt. Then the stick is split down the middle. She keeps one half, the stock, and the customer keeps the other, the foil. When it's time to pay, the two halves are matched up. If the notches align, the debt is verified. It is a fraud-proof, unhackable credit card made of a stick. In fact, the Bank of England will use this system until the 19th century. When they finally decided to burn the millions of old tax tally sticks in 1834, the fire got out of control and burned down the Houses of Parliament. That is how powerful medieval accounting can be. Since you are a stranger, you don't get a stick, you pay cash. Supper, ale, bed, she recites, counting on her fingers. 3 pence. It sounds cheap, but remember, a skilled laborer might only earn 3 or 4 pence a day. You have just spent a day's wages on a flea-bitten bed and a bowl of gruel. You fish the silver pennies out of your pouch. They are thin, hammered discs, worn smooth by circulation. You hand them over. She bites one, naturally, before dropping it into her apron. She gives you a nod. It's not a warm smile. She's not customer service trained, but it's an acknowledgement. You didn't stab anyone, you didn't vomit on the table, and you paid your bill. You are a good guest. You gather your cloak, swinging the heavy wool around your shoulders. It still smells of smoke, and now it has a few new straw stains, but it's yours. You check your belt. Knife is there, pouch is there. You are intact. You walk to the door. The merchant is already there, bargaining with a carrier about a cart. The pilgrim is adjusting his sandals, ready for another 10 miles of penance. The cycle of the road is starting up again. You step over the threshold, crossing back over that line between the sanctuary and the world. The air outside is crisp and cold, smelling of wood smoke from 100 chimneys waking up across the town. The mud in the street has frozen solid overnight, forming a jagged, treacherous landscape of ruts and hoofprints. You take a deep breath. The air is sharp in your lungs, clearing the last of the smoky haze from your head. You hear the clang of the blacksmith's hammer starting up again. You hear the cry of a street vendor selling hot pies. The town is moving. You look back at the tavern one last time. The alstake bush is swaying in the morning wind. The white swan sign creaks on its hinges. It looks shabby in the daylight, a lopsided timber box leaking smoke. But you know the secret now. You know that inside that rough shell is warmth, food, and a strange, chaotic kind of community. It is a lifeboat in a hard world. You turn your collar up against the wind. The road ahead is long. There are rivers to cross, forests to navigate, and other towns to reach. But for now, you are fed. You are rested, sort of, and you have a story to tell. You step out onto the frozen mud, your boots crunching on the ice, and walk into the 14th century morning. But you don't have to walk that road tonight. You can leave the frozen mud and the biting wind right there in the year 1350 Let the merchant argue about his cart. Let the pilgrim walk his miles. Let the alewife scrub her tables. They are just ghosts now, echoes of a time long gone, fading back into the mist of history. You are here in the present. The air around you isn't filled with wood smoke. It's clean and still. The ground beneath you isn't a mattress of straw and ropes. It is soft, supportive, and safe. There are no drafts here, no shutters rattling in the gale, just the quiet comfort of your own space. Take a moment to feel the difference. Feel the weight of your own blanket, clean and warm. Feel the softness of your pillow. Let the tension of that hard, wooden world drain out of your shoulders. You don't need to be on guard. You don't need to watch your purse or check for bed bugs. You can just let go. Imagine the tavern shrinking away in the distance, a tiny speck of warm light in a vast, dark landscape. It gets smaller and smaller until it's just a candle flame, and then it's gone. The noise of the medieval crowd fades into a gentle silence. The clatter of the dice, the crackle of the fire, the rooster's crow, it all drifts away, leaving you in a deep, peaceful quiet. You have finished the journey, you have survived the night, and now the only thing left for you to do is rest. Let your breathing slow down, let your eyes close. The history books are shut, the past is asleep, and now you can be too.